Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I am creating a series of video presentations for the Rankin Technical College AWD, that's Application and Website Development program, and in particular the AWD 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class for the fall 2019 semester. The textbook that will be used for the class is what's shown on the screen right now. That is ProASP.NET MVC 5, an A-Press publication authored by Adam Freeman. And I'm into Chapter 18 out of 27. So, setting the start URL and testing the application. As with all of the example programs, okay, so we've done this before. In other words, the author wants us to go to Project, Filters, Properties, Web, and click where it says Specific Page. Alright, that's all we have to do there. Alrighty, and then we are to do a Save All and run the application. Hopefully it's going to come up looking as it does on page 486, where it just says, this is the index action on the home controller. And there it is. All right. So it says we've already seen an example of filters back in Chapter 12. In that chapter, we applied authorization to some of the action methods for the sports score controller when we brought in the administrative piece to it. The author says he wanted the action method to be used only by users who authenticated themselves. So in other words, we wanted it set up so that really the only people who would be able to buy stuff would be people who were logged in. All right. And he says I could have checked the authorization status of the request in each and every action method. So we could have done something like this. You typically don't want to do that. You want to make the user's experience a nice experience. Again, we could have done it here. All right. So it was on the admin controller. What does that mean? That means that if you want to call anything that's in the admin, you've got to be authorized before you do it. So the only people who can create new products, modify existing products, drop existing products, would be people who are authorized to do so. All right. So as mentioned here, filters are .NET attributes that add extra steps to the request processing pipeline. I use the authorized filter in listing 18.6, which has the same effect as all those duplicated checks. So again, you already saw this in that early article that I alluded to, but I wanted to just show it to you in advance, and that is the MVC framework supports 5 different types of filters. Each of these filters allows you to introduce logic at different points in your program. Filter types are shown right here on page 488. I don't want to read them, and we've talked about them already anyway. Now notice that right underneath this table, the author says before the MVC framework invokes an action, it inspects the method definition to see if it has attributes that implement any of these interfaces that are shown here, any of these 5. If they do, then at the appropriate point in the request handling process, the methods are going to be invoked. And many of them, as you can see, run both before and after the action method has been, or the result has been executed. And as it says, the framework includes default attribute classes that implement the filter interface. The author will show us how to use these later in the chapter. Now it's funny because it says MVC 5 introduces a new interface. It's not really, it's new to people who already know MVC. How's that? So the action filter attribute one right here. The author says implements both the iAction filter and the iResult filter interfaces. The class is abstract. If you don't know what abstract is, and you should, all right, an abstract class is one that's so general in nature that it can't be instantiated. But what you do typically with an abstract class is you have that class create abstract methods, all right, which means it's just an empty method that any class that's going to inherit from that class must provide those methods. All right. Applying filters to controllers and action methods. As mentioned right here, filters can be applied to individual action methods or to an entire controller. We've already talked about this. So if you look at the example here, all right, it says in 18.6, I applied the authorized filter to the admin controller class, which has the same effect as applying it to each method in the controller. All right, so we've got it here. Okay, you can apply multiple filters. You can mix and match. You can set up different kinds of filters for different parts of the application, etc. Some filters in the listing, as it says, take parameters, and the author is going to make it a point to show you those. If you've defined a custom base class for your controllers, any filters applied to the base class will affect any derived class. So, using authorization filters, the middle of page 489. Notice, again, we mentioned this a little bit before, but I want to make sure you get it. And that is authorization filters run after the authentication filters. That should make sense. The first filter that should run should authenticate you. So if you log in, I know at a place I used to work at, you'd have to log in with your username and password. If you put in a bad username and or a bad password more than 3 times, all right, during your session, you'd be locked out for 30 minutes. So you'd either have to talk to somebody in user support or you'd have to wait. But after you were authenticated, then you were authorized. Again, think about it here at Rankin Technical College. There are certain things that if I go in here, let you into my world a little bit, and if I go in here, and I type in insiderankin.org. Oops, not like that. All right, so I come in with insiderankin.org. They make me log in again. All right, so this is my authentication. I click that, and boom, now I'm in. Now it's got to run through authorization, and it's got to say, for example, under academics, when I check my current classes, it says there are none because I'm not teaching a class during the summer. But if I look at future courses, that shows me the classes I'm going to be teaching in fall. Now, why am I showing you that? Well, if one of the other teachers in the IT programs here at Rankin, Mr. Brock Parsons, for example, if Brock comes in, and Brock teaches in the hardware area, but if he goes in and does this same thing, he's going to have different classes there. He may have 1 class, 2 class, 3 classes, but they'll be different because he teaches in a different area. I'm not authorized. I'm authenticated to use the system. I'm not authorized to see stuff that's not mine. All right? I mean, I could go back in here, for example, under faculty, and I can look, and this is stuff from last semester. All right? So I could go in here. In fact, this is from a year ago, and I could look at different things. Okay, so I could come in here, look at my class list, etc. But I couldn't do that for any other instructor. I can only do it for me because that's all I'm authorized to do it for. So again, authorization filters run after the authentication filters, before action filters, and before the action method is invoked. As the name suggests, an authorization filter helps you to enforce your authorization policy, which typically is going to be different at any company. There are places that I've worked at that were, for lack of better words, fairly lax with the way they set things up. I've worked at places where either we work with, for example, people in the government, all right, or we at least have to interface with them on occasion, and they're not going to be nearly as lax then. All right. There is a somewhat involved relationship between the authentication and authorization filters, which is easier to explain once you understand how authorization filters work. I explain this later in the chapter. Authorization filters implement the authorization filter interface shown here. You can, if you are so minded, create a class that implements this interface and add your own security logic. And the author says, see the sidebar here, why this is a bad idea. Well, it's a bad idea for a lot of reasons. First of all, if you write your own security policy, you're going to have to test the heck out of it, and it may only work for whatever it is you're working on right now, and it may not, it may have to constantly be updated, etc. Okay? Very few people have the ability to write really good security code. Plus, if you've got a package like the MVC framework that has, as the author mentions here, full-featured, for example, authorization filters, why should you write your own? All right, these have been tested. They're proven. There are sometimes millions of people who are using them. So rather than creating your own class that implements the authorization filter, a much safer approach, as the author says here, down towards the bottom half of page 490, is to create a subclass of the authorized attribute, which takes care of all the tricky stuff, as he says. It makes it easier to write custom code. The best way is to create a custom filter. To this end, the author has added an infrastructure folder to the project, so let's do that. No infrastructure here. Okay, there's everything, no infrastructure. So we right mouse click on the name of the project, add folder, infrastructure, and in there I believe we are to add a class, and that class will be called custom attribute.cs. And we are to replace kind of the boilerplate code that we get with that with the code that's shown in the book here. Now, the author mentions on the bottom of page 490, this is a simple authorization filter. It allows you to prevent access to local requests. A local request is one defined where the browser and the server are running on the same device, such as a developmental PC. The author says that he has used the simplest approach to creating an authorization filter, which is to subclass the authorized attribute class, then override the authorized core method. This ensures that we benefit from features built into the authorized attribute. Now, saying this, again, I am paraphrasing or directly quoting the author, where he says the interesting part of the filter class is the implementation of the authorized core method, which is down here. This is how the MVC framework checks to see if the filter will authorize access for a request. The argument that's shown here is of type HTTP context base. By taking advantage of the built-in features of the authorized attribute base class, We only have to focus on the authorization logic and return true if we want to indeed authorize the request, and false if we do not. Now, one thing the author mentions here, let me check my time. Yeah, I'm already getting up to it. All right, so I'm just going to finish this section up here. Keep your authorization attributes simple. The author says the authorized core method is passed to the base HTTP context base object, which provides access to information about the request, but not about the controller or action that the authorization attribute has been applied to. The main reason that developers implement the Authorization Filter interface directly is to get access to the authorization context passed, through which a much wider range of information can be obtained, including routing details and other things. The author says, I do not recommend this approach, not just because I think writing your own security code is dangerous, all right, but this tightly coupling the structure to the controllers undermines that separation of controls, and it can cause problems when unit testing. So as the author suggests here, keep your authorization attributes simple and focused on authorization based on the request. All right. So before we go on, continue on into applying the custom authorization filter on page 491, we'll stop for this part of the presentation.